To be able to speak in this debate on education as a member of the Education Select Committee, and to be able, I hope, to contribute something of use. With an ongoing leadership election, forthcoming spending review, there's a great opportunity to make progress, both to continue some of the great work that's happening and also to change things. Obviously, education is a broad and varied subject, Madam Deputy Speaker, so forgive me if I hop about a bit. But the most prominent education issue that we've heard and discussed across the House already during this debate is school funding. Put bluntly, there isn't enough of it. I absolutely welcome the government's step to increase support through the national funding formula, ensuring that every school gets a rise and gets above a set minimum level of funding. That benefits schools in constituencies like Mansfield that have been historically underfunded. It's a positive step. But the truth is, we're also making it harder in some areas. It's positive that government's protected the state sector from pension contribution rises, for example, next year, but at some point that will hit schools in the wallet, whilst the apprenticeship levy is also inadvertently affecting our schools' core budgets, for example. We haven't protected the independent school sector from those pension contributions in the same way, and some people will say, well, why should we? The truth is, if it impacts the independent sector to the extent that some suggest that it might, we could see closures in that sector, and the state schools will have to pick up the pieces, so that's not in our interests either. There's significant challenges in special educational needs provision. The Select Committee will report later on this year on this issue, and in committee we've heard reams of evidence from all across the sector. I want to point out that this too impacts on schools' core budgets. It's been mentioned by a member opposite, that schools are expected to find the first £6,000 of funding for each pupil with SEND, which stacks up, and particularly if you have a reputation for delivering excellent and inclusive education for those pupils. A good reputation attracts more children with SEND to your school, and this success creates real budgetary problems as more and more of that funding is spent on SEND provision without extra support. I don't think that's a sustainable system. We should be rewarding good practice, and actually, whether it's school places or school funding, these are issues that are increasingly visible in my constituency surgeries. I hear the same from colleagues across the House. Now, I'm a Tory MP, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm a Conservative with a big C and a small c, and I believe in people taking personal responsibility for their own lives. I believe your success is down to you and your hard work and your talent. I think government exists to ensure that everyone has the basic things they need to be able to take the opportunities that are out there, and that includes basic education and the skills you need to get on in life. And how far you get beyond that is up to you. Well, I'm not one for excessive government intervention in near enough anything else, Madam Deputy Speaker. And even in education, we should be clear that it's parents who are responsible for raising their children. But there are many children out there who need us from early years and all the way through the system to ensure that they have that chance in life. Put bluntly, if we want people to take that personal responsibility for their lives and to ask as adults what they can do for themselves rather than what government can do for them, we have to equip them properly as children through education. Our education system is the best chance that the state has to fulfil that duty to ensure that everybody is able to succeed on their own merits, regardless of their own background or upbringing or what barriers they may face early on in their lives, and frankly also to deal with issues early on that save the taxpayer money later in life too. We have to ensure that parents take those responsibilities seriously and that we support them when they need it. And in my view, we should also do more to help children in most deprived communities and from the most challenging backgrounds to have those basic tools they need for life. We're visiting some of the schools in Mansfield, which is a former coalfield constituency with significant social challenges. You realise that school's the only place that some kids have that's warm and safe and welcoming and with people that they trust. I would make the same case for youth clubs and other youth services and children's services too. And I think we're asking schools to properly support those children, then frankly they need significantly more money. A school funded to be able to be flexible and inclusive of all but the most challenging students would benefit both the community and in the long run the taxpayer. So I've been genuinely delighted, as people have mentioned, to hear so many positive pledges for school funding throughout the leadership contest. I look forward to seeing them taken forward as soon as possible. We should also be looking at, in my view, the opportunities of technology to reduce teacher workload, to manage data, personalise lessons for individual pupils, to assess, generally take the strain off teachers and allow them to focus on supporting their students. We have, I think, 25% of the world's edtech businesses here in the United Kingdom, but no clear route, as far as I can see, to roll out and test that technology in our schools. I can see a great proposal for a pilot project that I'm recommending to the Minister. I can recommend a very good constituency for him to try it in. And perhaps conversations that we can take forward through Select Committee as well, something I've raised there. Despite the many challenges, there are some excellent schools out there delivering incredible education and opportunities to young people. Very few weeks go by in the academic year when I don't visit a school or college in Mansfield. And just last week I visited Brunt Academy to see what they were up to for School Sports Week, which is an excellent initiative and needs more promotion as far as I can see as well. I met Miss Lockwood and some of the pupils there to hear about some of the extracurricular opportunities and the great work they do to go above and beyond for their pupils. It's always fantastic to see, and a great credit to the many schools and teachers that do a great job. But to boost facilities and capital spending, I've suggested a few times before, Madam Deputy Speaker, the opportunity to maybe build new school buildings and relocate existing schools to these great new facilities and cover some of that cost through development of the old sites, something I love to chat about with ministers again. As my right honourable friend, my honourable friend from East Worthing and Shoreham has said, this has become the biggest issue in my constituency and in my inbox, and it needs a resolution. Another challenge in this sector, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an appropriate one for estimate debate, so after all about the money, I could go through the whole system with a whole ream of different ideas and suggestions of all sorts of things, but we'll stick to the government spending bits. Another challenge is further education funding. Those who look at the details will see that FE is part of the sector that has the least support. It's incredibly frustrating, as so often colleges are in a constant state of reform and realignment and merger that makes it incredibly difficult to focus on what they're there for. My own local college, which for a long time has been a bit of a beacon and aspiration for our community, has its own problems, some created by former local leadership who have now moved on, but the college is having to rebuild and restructure and refocus on the local provision that really matters. They're doing a grand job of it, actually, and getting back on track, which is fantastic. But I know that education ministers are staunch advocates for college funding, and we need to ensure that these are places that are getting young people ready for work. We're rolling out T-levels, which I think are a step in the right direction in terms of balancing the equation between academic and technical education. We should value our technical skills and qualifications as much as other routes, and I hope that government can make a success of it. We're often guilty of talking about aspiration and social mobility in terms of how many people go to university, when in truth university is not the right choice for everybody. In fact, I'd be so bold as to say too many people go to university chasing after promised outcomes that don't exist, and we'd be better off taking alternative routes. But for many people, college is the direct route into work at 18. Often vocational and technical courses are more expensive to run. They need specialist equipment. The additional pressure of unfunded requirements for pupils with special educational needs right up to 25 now is another challenge. And for these pupils, the support they get at college perhaps decides if they're ever likely to get into work. But not only does extensive rounded support help them as individuals with those additional needs, it also helps us all as taxpayers, because if they're able to find meaningful work and support themselves, that saves us all later on. The recurring theme here across both school and FE and early years and children's services and youth provision and everything else is that these aren't costs, they're investments, and that the evidence shows they lead to great savings further down the line. Money spent early on in the education system reduces exclusions, behavioural problems, social care needs, reduces costs for adult support services, reduces the amount of young people that end up in prison, saves the state money in countless other ways. The government's own figures show this. The 2018 health profile for England, for example, states that educational attainment is strongly linked with lower instances of long-term disease and mental health conditions. Invest money early on in health visitors, early years, primary schools, save it later in our NHS. Equally, invest in our schools and colleges and support young people into work, support adults in retraining, changing careers or achieving basic skills, saving money in the welfare system. You boost productivity, you have happier and healthier populations. So FE funding needs to increase, and again, I welcome pledges that have been made throughout the leadership contest. Part of that college and FE system includes apprenticeships. Apprenticeship spending has gone through the roof, which I welcome, and the levy is still a work in progress, but I'd echo the comments that were made about the Minister for this department, who absolutely takes this incredibly seriously and seems to enjoy it also along the way. But I'd like to see increased flexibility to ensure that this money gets used. I'd suggest, and have suggested, allowing part of the levy pot to be used for planning and training and development to get in place a plan as to how you spend the rest of the levy and make sure that employers have that opportunity to realise the potential benefits. It might help to ensure more businesses utilise that cash. Equally, more flexibility on how it can be used, such as allowing recruitment firms to spend their levy pot on upskilling job seekers, helping people get ready for work, in turn boosting our overall productivity. It sounds to me like a good thing. Ideas I'd be happy to discuss further. The Augur Review provides the opportunity to make big changes across FE and HE and to meet some of these challenges. Though not all of the ideas within it are good, it certainly shows some positive ways that reform could benefit the whole sector. I'm flying through this now, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I'm getting close to the time you talked about. I'm nearly there. But you've got me on my favourite subject, so I'm going to get it all out. I wanted to end on some fairly disparate points across other areas of education. Can I massively welcome the Children's Social Care Innovation Programme, which has invested 200 million of government funding in up to 98 projects for local authorities to develop, test and scale new approaches to supporting vulnerable children in our care system. We need to find answers to so many questions in children's services, not least how we move to a more proactive and preventative approach that means we don't take so many children into care. And learning in this area is hugely important, as is the extra £1 billion in the budget for next year, which is very positive. I've spoken about how front-loading spend on education into education will save in the long run. The same is true for children's services, and perhaps even more so with these often very vulnerable young people. I also welcome the additional funding to support maintain nurseries through to the spending review, which was much needed. We should consider how we can best utilise early years funding to support those who need it most, because as I've said before in the Select Committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, as much as I personally am very excited about my youngest turning 3 next month and how much that's going to save me in childcare, I'm not convinced that my family is amongst those most in need of financial help. It's brilliant to be able to reduce people's childcare costs and to help people take on more hours and get into work. Perhaps we could revisit those thresholds and put some of that money to more effective use, or look again at the funding for nurseries themselves for delivering those free hours and making sure that it's sustainable. The ability to have better career paths, training and staff development within nurseries would help reduce staff turnover and offer better support for children, just in the same way as doing so in schools, for teachers would do so in schools. Needless to say, I'm a passionate advocate for delivering for our young people, and I think there's anywhere in government that money should be spent, it's here on education and children's services, which should be a key priority. And the stats on ever-improving school standards and attainment are massively welcome, with more children reaching basic standards in literacy and numeracy, more good and outstanding schools, and some excellent progress, which we should be proud of. There's much more to do, and particularly for the most vulnerable. I hope this will be absolute #1 domestic priority for the next Prime Minister come this summer.